أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم برضوان إلى يوم الدين. So today is Juz 6 and in Juz 6 I'm going to pick up just few verses from Surah Al-Ma'idah, mostly towards the beginning of the surah, and in these 25 minutes don't even have enough time to go through any detailed tafsir of particular verses. So I'm usually just reflecting on pick up some selective verses and just reflect on those selective verses. So we are starting Surah Al-Ma'idah in Juz 6, and Surah Al-Ma'idah is, according to many traditions, was one of the last surahs that was revealed to Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And according to one tradition narrated by Asma bint Yazid radiyallahu anha, that it was revealed on the journey back to Makkah from Hujjatul Wida. And so it is interesting that this surah revealed towards the end of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's life, when most of the principles were established and most of the instructions regarding how one should conduct himself or herself, what the limits of halal and haram is, most of it was already established by that time. If you go through the khutbah that Prophet ﷺ gave in Hujjatul Wida, prohibition of interest and taking care of the rights and talking about that Allah has completed His religion for you, all of that happened in Hujjatul Wida. And so this surah is important to understand from the perspective that chronologically it was towards the end. Although chronology is not important, because chronology for every verse is not maintained and preserved. What is maintained and preserved is this order in which we find the Quran in. And so, and the order that we find the Quran is through the direct instruction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet, and then Prophet on that basis instructing his writer to where to insert the revelations that he used to receive throughout his messengerhood. So the order is important. The order is from Allah. And so we should try to reflect on why that order exists in the Quran when we try to reflect on Quran and its meanings in general. So this surah is something that describes, the first ayah of the surah is Ya ayyuhallazina amanu awfu bil uqud, that, O believers, observe honor the bonds that Allah has placed on you. The honor the limits that Allah has put before you. And so here what is being asked in the very first part of the very first ayah is that once you have believed, once you have come to recognize the true faith, once you have decided to belong to that faith, then you must also bind yourself to observe the rules and regulations and limits and halal and haram and everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described. So Iman itself is not sufficient without ita'ah, without obedience to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands from us, requires from us as a result of our faith in Allah. And so the surah, the very first, these few words of the surah are significant in that sense, that if and if you look at it in the chronological sense also, you will appreciate the significance of this verse. That even in a chronological reflection of the Quran, that for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reveal and emphasize towards this period of time in Prophet's life, as he is traveling back from Hujjatul Wida, knowing that his mission is coming to an end, these verses were being revealed. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. So then that you must observe the bounds and limits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed before you. And then as an example, or as the emphasis on the kind of bindings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed before us, he starts with the number one thing, is أُحِلَّتْ لَكُمْ بَهِيمَةُ الْأَنْعَامِ إِلَّا مَا يُتْلَى عَلَيْكُمْ غَيْرَ مُحِلِّ الصَّيْدِ وَأَنْتُمْ حُرُمٌ. So after making that very general statement of أَوْفُوا بِالْعُقُودِ, immediately the next attention is drawn to أُحِلَّتْ لَكُمْ بَهِيمَةُ الْأَنْعَامِ إِلَّا مَا يُتْلَى عَلَيْكُمْ, that for you all grazing beasts of flocks are permitted for you, except those which are recited to you later here in the Quran. And so immediately the attention turns to your own personal life, individual life, and immediately it turns to your source of nutrition and your source of survival, and with that, because without eating we cannot survive. And so what is it that we can eat? What is it permitted? What is not permitted? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places great emphasis on it. Our Sharia contains detailed rules and regulations about what is you are permitted to eat and what you are not permitted to eat. And so I think it is important to understand and recognize the seriousness of what we put in our bodies, what we allow to go down our throat, and what we do not allow to go down from our throats. And in today's environment, with all the obesity and everything going on, I mean, the secular world also pays attention to it, and people adopt diets, and people adopt strict limits of diets, because everyone recognizes the goodness or badness of what you eat, and but those are the rules that human beings develop themselves. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us certain rules and limits for which we do not need to create any more limitations on our body, or by increasing those limits, or by not observing those limits and relaxing those rules for ourselves. In both cases, we will be doing wrong. So it's not just what is halal and what is haram, it is also our attitudes towards food, and it's also about how much we consume, and it's also about fasting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined in terms of taking break from eating. And so all of those things are should be included in these rules. And although these rules may appear to be somewhat specific, but as we go on, I think you will understand that the rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in these verses are supreme in nature. I mean, they are in hierarchically, they transcend all the other rules, in terms of they are the rules that drive, that overrule, or many of the sub rules are details of these primary rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. And then the next verse starts to say, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tuhillu sha'air Allahi wala shahr al-harama wala al-hadiya wala al-qala'ida wala amin al-bayt al-harama yabtaghuna fadlan min rabbihim wa ridwana wa iza halaltum fastadu. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing to the experience that believers had just gone through in Hujjatul Wida, in which they observed so many ritualistic things that they had to do, bringing animals to sacrifice, sacrificing animals, and there were certain traditions associated with the animals of sacrifice in terms of respecting those animals, in terms of decorating those animals, and all those things used to happen in the time of Hajj. And these were some of those traditions were continuing from the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and the Arabs and the Quraysh still used to observe those things. And so the question arises, what's the futility of that? I mean, the real thing is your connection with Allah. The real thing is to doing the right thing in the world. Real thing is your conduct. What is the relationship between that and these ritualistic things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined, which he warns against and says, La tuhillu sha'air Allah. Don't desecrate these symbols of devotion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And so these sha'air are something that permeates most of our ibadats with Allah. That when you pray, you stand up in a particular position, you go through very particular motions. Because otherwise the prayer is connecting with Allah and talking to Allah. It could be done in any form, in any way, and outside of formal prayers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that you can remember Him and you can pray to Him and you can ask Him and you can talk to Him sitting, sleeping, waking, walking, running, doing anything else. But the formal prayers are the sha'air that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined on us, and it is important to observe those sha'air. And so oftentimes we hear sometimes the statement that the tradition and there is no need to stick to the tradition, or these are just the traditions. But traditions play a very important role in human collective behavior and human collective attitudes. Tradition makes life easier in the sense that you know what is expected of you, rather than everyone not recognize what is expected of you. When you enter someone's home, you recognize the tradition, what you should do, how you should observe, what you should do and what you should not do. And so in that sense, there are traditions that are continue in terms of how you celebrate things. And so those are traditions may not be necessarily linked with specific instructions, but it is important to recognize the significance of those traditions. And if you destroy all traditions, then the life loses its order, its structure, and the life becomes chaotic, and then you don't know what to do. And then also tradition allows you to conform your behavior in a proper manner in which the other person immediately understands what you mean by following the tradition. In the absence of that, we may express ourselves in certain ways in which the person may not even understand what we mean, because we convey what we mean through our behavior, through our actions, through our raising our hands and going through different kinds of motions and doing different kinds of things. So those things are important. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked us to give up only those traditions that go against His commands, those goes against His Sharia, that carry anything that goes against the moral teachings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined. And if there are any of those things should be removed. But as you see here in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala counts all the traditions that used to belong to the mushrikeen of Makkah. الشهر الحرام ولا الهدي ولا القلائد ولا أمين البيت الحرام يبتغون فضلا من ربهم ورضوانا. So all the rituals of the Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved. And not only preserved those rituals, but asked everyone to honor them. And asked everyone not to violate them. And so I think in that sense we need to understand the significance and the importance and the role that the traditions play in our lives. And then the next part of this verse, and it is still continuing verse 2, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points to another instruction. وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ أَن صَدُّوكُمْ عَنِ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ أَن تَعْتَدُوا وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. That, O believers, do not let your enmity against people who have barred you from your holy mosque move you to commit undue transgression. Rather, help one another in acts of righteousness and piety, and do not help one another in sin and transgression. So, for the longest time, I've been reflecting on this verse, and I'm trying to understand and read what others have written about it in terms of what is the connection between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying in the same context, in the same verse, about the sha'air Allah and about uhillat lakum bahimatul anam in the verse immediately preceding it, and suddenly turn to this instruction, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ أَن صَدُّوكُمْ عَنِ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ أَن تَعْتَدُوا. Because on the surface this appears to be an instruction that is related to our behavior and not to the halal and haram and permitted and non-permitted or tradition that we must observe and not violate. And suddenly it switches to something that is we would consider tangible compared to something that is untangible in terms of its instructions. وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ أَن صَدُّوكُمْ عَنِ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ أَن تَعْتَدُوا, that you should not do undue transgression against an example of people against whom you will carry maximum anger in your hearts. I mean, our feeling of the sanctity of the holy place and the sacredness of it. If anyone violates it, I mean, even if someone goes to inside that place and violates it in the sense of disrespecting it, and we see someone disrespecting it, you can imagine how much we are filled with anger against such persons, even to this day. And here, it's not that someone is just disrespecting, but preventing you from even going into your holy sacred place, the Masjid al-Haram. And so, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives that extreme example of people against whom your anger and your enmity will know no limits. That you can say, okay, come and destroy my house, but don't destroy Allah's house, that sacred place, that Kaaba. The whole ummah is going to stand to protect that place. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives that kind of extreme example and says, do not commit transgression against those people. You can defend yourself as long as you have the possibility of defending yourself. But don't in your anger go out to destroy those people in ways in which you transgress upon them, where your transgression is greater than what they did. And the context in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this instruction is this context of La tuhillu sha'air Allahi wa la shahr al-haram. I mean, not only that place, but the months that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has declared as sacred, don't violate them. And we hold those instructions very highly. Most Muslims will hold those instructions, those sha'air, very highly in terms of not allowing them to violate them. A very common, simple example sometimes that I observe, and all all of us observe is we are in the masjid, we are praying, and the instruction is for everyone to keep quiet. But someone forgets to turn off his cell phone. And if someone's cell phone makes a noise, then the whole masjid turns towards that person as soon as you say salam. And a person will stand and very angrily say, remember to turn off your cell phones. That's how much we take the sacredness, not just Masjid al-Haram, but any place which we designate as an ordinary masjid. And so imagine our anger against such people who violate the sacredness of that kind of place, Masjid al-Haram. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives for us that extreme example in the context of La tuhillu sha'air Allah, that don't wala ta'tadu, don't exceed in what you do to them compared to what was actually done physically. And then not only he says don't transgress, but he leaves the possibility, your social interaction with those peoples is not turned off immediately. وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. That the possibility of you working with them, trying to convince them, persuade them, and change their behavior, and agreeing with them to cooperate in things that are good despite something else they had done great wrong. I think it's an amazing instruction from Allah. It's an amazing verse in Quran, and I don't know any books of ethics and morals can put such high standards on the behavior that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs us to. وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ أَنْ صَدُّوكُمْ عَنِ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ أَنْ تَعْتَدُوا وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Then comes the next verse. The next verse immediately starts to detail all of the animals and the kind of animals, their mode of death that are not permitted for you. And it lists them in detail. It could have been said any animal that dies outside of your slaughtering it in the proper method is not permitted for you. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to list each one of them. And before I go into that, I think one of the traditions that we find regarding this ayah is from the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh, that once he was conversing with some Jewish friend in Medina when he was Khalifa. And so that friend said to him that in your book there is a verse that if it was revealed to us, we would have made that day a day of Eid for us. And that is this part of this verse which says, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-islam adina. That today I have perfected for you your religion and have bestowed upon you my bounty in full measure and have been pleased to assign you for you Islam as your religion. And so Umar ibn al-Khattab replied to that person by saying, I clearly remember it was Yawmun Nahar on the Hujjatul Wida, which is the day in which we celebrate Eid al-Adha in the rest of the world. And Umar ibn al-Khattab said, I clearly remember that it was on that day that Prophet ﷺ received this revelation. And so indeed, that day is a day of Eid for us. So that's one thing. The other thing we need to understand is in this context, if this is the last verse that was revealed to Prophet ﷺ, as it is said by many accounts, Because in this verse, Allah is subhanahu wa ta'ala is declaring, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-islam adina. That today I have perfected my religion for you and completed whatever favor I was going to do to you by making this Islam as a religion for you, because there cannot be any more complete, greater favor than that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed on us. That verse contains, just before closing the hidayah, the revelation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considered to describe حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةُ وَالدَّمُ وَلَحْمُ الْخِنْزِيرِ, that forbidden for you is carrion and blood and flesh of swine, وَمَا أُهِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ, and the animals that are slaughtered in any name other than Allah's, وَالْمُنْخَنِقَةُ وَالْمَوْقُوذَةُ وَالْمُتَرَدِّيَةُ وَالنَّطِيحَةُ, and animals which have been killed either by being strangled or killed by any blow, or died because they fell, or died because they were devoured by beast or prey, unless it was إِلَّا مَا زَكَّيْتُمْ, unless you did the purification of it. إِلَّا مَا زَكَّيْتُمْ وَمَا زُبِهَ عَلَى النُّصُبِ, and that which is slaughtered on the altars of your idols. وَأَن تَسْتَقْسِمُوا بِالْأَزْلَامِ, and that you distribute the meat or what you eat based on the throwing the arrows, like you just do a lottery and say who gets what. And so in that sense, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala details in very detail. And so it means that eating an animal which is not properly slaughtered in the manner in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us that it be slaughtered must be an extremely significant thing in the Sharia. If the last verse that was revealed to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes down with that. And it spends so much time in terms of listing in detail every single kind of death that an animal may suffer, and then saying all of that is forbidden for you. And even unless you find something that is still alive, and then you illa ma zakkaitum. So tazkiyah for the animals is a very specific term in Sharia, which means to kill the animal in a very certain way, where you allow the blood to flow out of it, and then you take Allah's name before you kill it, and so and then you hang it so that blood is taken out of the body. This is the process that in Sharia most scholars describe as what is known as tazkiyah. So mama akalla sab' illa ma zakkaytum, illa, except that which you purify and you take it through the process of tazkiyah. And so I think it is important that we take extreme care in terms of what we put in our bodies. Not just in terms of certainty and surety of it, that even if there is a doubt, leaves that which is doubtful. There are many examples in the stories of the prophets and companions and tabi'een and taba tabi'een, where it is described that someone brought them food, and later on it appeared to them that it was doubtful. Not that it was bad, but it was doubtful to them. It appeared doubtful to them. And although Sharia doesn't require you to do this, but they were so careful that they will put fingers in your throat and throw everything out of their body. They didn't want to allow that to persist in their body. And so eating halal, eating tayyib, eating what is permitted by Allah, and taking extreme care in this regard. in terms of almost becoming fundamentalist about it, in terms of what you eat, what you put in your body, is important. I mean, you can take a lot of relaxation in terms of many other social rules, because social rules, there are many different ways in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits you to behave based on what the situation and circumstances are. But in terms of food that you eat and what you put in your body, you must take extreme care, because this is the last instruction that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in the Quran. The last thing that was revealed to Allah, and after reciting this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. Today I perfected my religion for you. And then it continues, under what circumstances you will be allowed to consume something that is not permitted. And here again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses very extreme example. فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ فِي مَخْمَثَةٍ غَيْرَ مُتَجَانِفٍ لِإِثْمٍ. So whoever is forced by his hunger without inclining towards sin. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses makhmasa as a word for hunger. And so in Arabic there are three different verses, three different words that even Quran uses to indicate hunger. And ordinary hunger is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes as jo. Jo is the kind of hunger you come home and you say, I'm hungry and I need food. And then you wait for the food to arrive and you eat that food. That's the kind of hunger that is known as jo. Another kind of hunger is described in Surah Al-Balad, in which there is another word for it. It's escaping my mind right now. I don't have time to look up for it. But the makhmasa is the third degree of hunger. Makhmasa is the kind of hunger where if you don't get food, you will almost faint or die or not be able to survive, and you badly need food. So فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ فِي مَخْمَسَةٍ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given an exception only in those cases in which you feel this extreme hunger and without inclining towards sin, meaning you are not taking it to violate what Allah has prohibited, but only to survive, because there preserving your life take precedence over not violating that rule, because preserving life is the overruling instruction to all the other instructions. Preserving the life is something that is obligatory upon that hierarchically above all other obligations of life. And so in those cases, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits you to violate that. So I think it is important to understand this aspect of this revelation. I was also going to go to the third section of this in these verses, the verse 6, which describes the importance of tahara and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that we must observe purification of the body before standing before Allah and its relationship with the prayer and everything else. But I think I'm running out of time today. I've already spoken more than the time that was allotted to me. So I'm going to end here, and inshallah maybe tomorrow I will touch upon it a little bit and then move on from it to other concepts from Juz 7 inshallah. So أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.